A shy intern greeted a deaf visitor, unaware the CEO was watching from behind. "Get her out of my sight." Those 4 words cut through the marble silence of the tower lobby, leaving a young intern frozen in fear. Mia Collins, 23, was used to being invisible, but that morning, her quiet world collided with a storm of power and shame. A wealthy CEO watched from the shadows, a deaf son hidden behind locked doors, and a desperate man begging to be understood. One fragile act of kindness would change everything. What would you have done in his place? Stay with me till the very end, and let me know where you're watching from, so I can see how far the truth really spreads. Mia Collins was 23, an intern in the marketing department, and the kind of girl most people forgot 5 minutes after meeting. She spoke softly, kept her shoulders tucked in, and spent her days fetching coffee or making copies. Years of being underestimated had taught her that blending into the background was the safest choice. Yet beneath her quiet surface was a heart that carried a secret strength, shaped by her love for a younger brother who was born deaf. That morning in the lobby, Mia tried to keep her usual distance, hugging her bag close as she walked past the crowd. Then she noticed a man standing at the reception desk. His hands moved rapidly, his lips forming words that the receptionist could not understand. Confusion clouded the air, but what stopped Mia was his eyes. They were filled with the same aching loneliness she had seen in her brother's face, the look of someone desperate to connect but locked outside of understanding. Her chest tightened. Fear surged instantly, telling her to look away, to keep walking. She had spent her entire life avoiding moments like this, moments that demanded attention. Her palms grew slick, her heart pounded, and she wished she could melt into the wall. But another memory rose within her, stronger than fear. She saw her brother as a child, his hands signing in frustration, tears streaking his face while no one listened. She could not walk away this time. Mia drew in a shaky breath. Her body trembled as if she was stepping off a cliff, yet she forced her feet forward. Raising her hands, hesitant at first, she shaped the words she had practiced for years. "Hello, Sia, may I help you?" The man froze. Then his entire face lit with relief, pure and overwhelming. His hands answered quickly, spilling gratitude, saying he had believed no one here would understand him. The receptionist gaped, and people nearby stopped to watch. For the first time in this building, Mia was not invisible. She was seen for something real. From the elevator, Lawrence Reynolds, the CEO, had arrived in time to witness every gesture. His expression stayed hard, but in his eyes, a flicker betrayed him. Because he too had a child who lived in silence, and he had never dared to speak his son's language. Lawrence's office was quiet, the kind of silence that made every second stretch longer. He sat behind his desk, his gaze locked on Mia, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. When he finally spoke, his voice carried no anger, only a sharp curiosity. He asked her why she knew sign language. Mia's hands fidgeted in her lap, but her words came steady. She spoke of her younger brother, born deaf, and of the nights she stayed up watching videos until her fingers could finally form words. She said she could not stand seeing him left out, so she learned to bring him in. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the city outside. Lawrence leaned back in his chair, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on a point beyond her, and Mia sensed he was far away. When he spoke again, his words were slower. He admitted he had a son, Noah, only 5 years old, also deaf. His voice dropped lower, heavy with guilt, when he confessed that he had never learned to sign. He said he watched his boy retreat into silence each day, and he could not bridge the gap. The weight of his honesty pressed into the room. For a man used to control, it sounded almost like surrender. He rubbed his forehead and sighed, as if speaking the truth had drained him. Then he looked back at Mia, his eyes softer, though still shadowed. He said he did not know how else to reach his son. There was a pause before his next words, like he was testing them on his tongue. He told her he wanted her to move into his home. She would continue her duties at the company, but in the evenings, she would help Noah, teach him, guide him, give him something his father could not yet give. Mia's heart jolted. The idea felt impossible. She was only an intern, not someone who belonged in the home of a CEO. She opened her mouth to protest, but then she caught his expression. The mask of power was still there, but beneath it was loneliness, raw and unhidden. For the first time she saw not just a boss, but a father asking for help. Against the fear rising in her chest, Mia nodded. Mia moved into Lawrence's house a week later. It was grand, with wide halls and high ceilings, but the silence felt heavier than the walls themselves. It was not the kind of silence that soothed. It was the kind that pressed down, thick with things left unsaid. Noah sat on the carpet, a toy car rolling back and forth between his small hands. He never looked up when Mia entered, his body folded in on itself, as if he were hiding in plain sight. His eyes stayed low, his shoulders tense, and it was clear he had built a world that allowed no one else inside. Lawrence stood in the doorway. His arms were crossed, but it was not indifference. His gaze was fixed on his son, sharp yet hesitant, as if he longed to move closer, but his body refused to obey. His fingers twitched slightly against his sleeve, betraying the urge to reach out, yet his feet stayed rooted. Every second he lingered there, Mia could feel the weight of his distance. It was not coldness, it was fear. Mia lowered herself to the floor a few feet from Noah. She did not push, did not raise her voice. She let the stillness hold them both, then slowly lifted her hands. Her fingers moved carefully, forming words she had said countless times before. "You are safe with me." Noah kept his eyes on the car. He pushed it back and forth, the wheels spinning in endless circles, pretending not to notice. But Mia stayed, repeating the same phrase, her movements gentle, steady, patient. She softened her face each time, hoping the warmth in her expression would reach him, even if her words did not. Finally, Noah's gaze flicked upward, just for a heartbeat. His eyes darted to her hands, then quickly back to the toy. It was so small a glance that most people might have missed it, but Mia felt it like a spark in the dark. Lawrence saw it too. His chest rose sharply, his jaw tightening, as though holding back years of regret. Mia kept her hands moving, calm and sure. She knew trust was built one fragile moment at a time. And that night, in a house filled with silence, a door cracked open, not just for Noah, but for his father watching from the shadows. The change in the office began quietly. At first, Mia only noticed small pauses in conversations when she walked into the marketing floor. A laugh would cut short, eyes would shift, and the air would thicken. Soon she realized it was not her imagination. Whispers followed her through the hallways, always just out of earshot. Elena had started it. She told anyone willing to listen that Mia was using the CEO's child to climb the ladder. She said no intern had ever been given that kind of access without hidden motives. The words spread like spilled ink, staining everything they touched. By the end of the week, Mia felt eyes on her every time she sat down at her desk. One afternoon, Claire, another intern who had once shared lunch breaks with Mia, leaned in and whispered a warning. People were saying she was getting special treatment, that she was playing a game no one else could win. Claire's voice was kind, but the look in her eyes carried distance. Even those who believed Mia felt safer stepping back. Meetings became harder. Every suggestion Mia offered was met with polite nods, but no follow-up. Laughter sometimes broke out in corners when she passed by. She tried to bury herself in work, but the feeling of being watched never left. It was not the indifference she had once known. It was worse. It was suspicion. Lawrence never addressed the rumors. He remained silent, his expression unreadable whenever his gaze landed on Mia. To others, it looked like confirmation, like he was protecting her. But to Mia, it felt like standing under a spotlight with no shield. She went home each evening exhausted, not from the tasks she completed, but from the weight of being misjudged. And yet she stayed. Because at night, Noah's eyes lit up when she signed to him. That tiny spark reminded her why she had said yes in the first place. Still, in the office, the undercurrent grew stronger, and Mia knew the storm was only beginning. The quarterly meeting carried a sharp edge of tension. Mark was seated at the front, waiting patiently, while the professional interpreter was still caught in traffic. Murmurs spread across the table, and Elena seized her chance. She said the meeting should be postponed, rather than risk letting an intern handle it. Her voice was firm, her smile smug. Lawrence cut through the noise with a calm decision. His words left no room for doubt. Mia would step in until the interpreter arrived. A wave of surprise rippled across the room. Mia felt her throat tighten, her palms damp. Every pair of eyes turned to her, and Elena leaned back in satisfaction, certain this was the moment she had been waiting for. Mia stood slowly. Her knees trembled, and her breath came shallow. She began to sign, her voice shaping Mark's words, but nerves twisted her fingers. The fluid grace she had practiced turned jagged and uncertain. Mark's brows furrowed, confusion flickering in his eyes. Soft laughter trickled from the back of the room, and Mia's chest burned with shame. She looked up, desperate for an anchor, and her gaze caught Lawrence. His face was unreadable. His eyes were steady on her, but she could not tell if he was disappointed or silently urging her forward. The uncertainty sliced deeper than the laughter. Not knowing whether she was failing him or being tested made her hands shake harder. The signs blurred, her mistakes piling one over another. Elena's smirk widened, triumph written on her face. Mia's voice faltered, cracked, and finally stopped altogether. The silence that followed was louder than the whispers. Her heart pounded in her ears as humiliation swallowed her. She whispered an apology and fled the room. The walls of the restroom closed in around her as tears streamed down her face. She pressed her hands against the cold sink, the image of Lawrence's unreadable gaze flashing in her mind again and again. Was it disappointment? Was it patience? The not knowing cut her worst of all. A soft knock came at the door. Mr. Parker stood waiting, a clean handkerchief in his weathered hand. His voice was low, steady with years of guiding young people through storms. He told her that courage was not about never falling. True courage was in standing back up. Mia clutched the handkerchief, her breath still ragged. The sting of failure was sharp, but his words pressed into the cracks of her despair like light slipping through a broken window. She was not sure she believed him yet, but something in her refused to let go. The sting of failure still clung to Mia when the news reached her. Mark had asked specifically for her to interpret his private meeting. No one could believe it. The professional interpreter raised an eyebrow. Elena rolled her eyes so hard it almost drew laughter from the others. But Mark's request was final, and Mia felt her pulse race with a mix of fear and disbelief. She wanted to refuse. The memory of trembling hands and mocking whispers was still fresh. But there was something in Mark's steady gaze that told her he saw beyond her mistakes. For the first time, she wondered if she was being asked not because she was perfect, but because she was human. That thought alone gave her the courage to walk into the small conference room the next morning. The setting was intimate, just a handful of people. Mark sat across the table, his hands already moving with calm assurance. Mia took her place beside him, her shoulders tense but her breathing even. She focused on his eyes, on the rhythm of his gestures, and slowly the fear that had paralyzed her before began to loosen its grip. This time her hands flowed with confidence. She did not just translate the words. She let the weight of his pauses and the warmth of his emphasis pass through her voice. When he spoke of frustration, her tone carried the heaviness. When he signed about hope, her voice softened as if holding something fragile. The room felt different. It was no longer about an intern proving herself. It was about a message being delivered in its true form. Lawrence sat in silence at the head of the table. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes did not leave Mia. At first it was simple assessment, the way he studied all his employees. But as minutes passed, there was something else. His gaze shifted, as if seeing not just a translator, but a young woman carrying empathy that reached places strategy never could. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Noah. The boy had slipped quietly into the room, drawn by the movement of hands and the cadence of voices. He leaned against the doorframe, his small eyes fixed on Mia with an interest Lawrence had not seen in a long time. The boy was paying attention. The boy was curious. It struck Lawrence harder than any business pitch ever had. Mark finished his presentation and looked directly at Lawrence. His hands moved deliberately, and Mia's voice carried the words with clarity. He said he was ready to partner, but only under one condition. Mia would lead the communications side of the project, not as an intern, not as an assistant, as the head of a new initiative for inclusion. Mia froze. Her heart stumbled at the weight of those words. She nearly missed the next signs because disbelief clouded her vision. She forced herself to repeat the message, her voice shaking as if afraid to release it. The room fell into a heavy silence once the condition was spoken. Lawrence leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied Mia. She felt the heat of his attention and wanted to shrink, but there was no place to hide. This was no rumor, no whispered speculation. This was recognition, spoken aloud by a man who saw her worth. For a moment, Mia expected rejection. She thought Lawrence would laugh off the idea or politely decline. But instead, he tapped his fingers together, his jaw set, and nodded once. It was not just agreement. It was a signal that something had shifted. Mia's breath caught. The humiliation of the past days had not defined her after all. In its place stood something stronger. For the first time since she entered the company, she was not invisible. She was chosen, and deep inside, she felt the fragile beginnings of trust, not just in others, but in herself. The signing ceremony was meant to be a celebration, but tension hung in the air. As Mark prepared his closing remarks, Elena suddenly rose from her seat. Her voice cut through the room like a blade as she accused the company of risking millions on an amateur. Mia felt the weight of every eye turning toward her. For a moment, the old instinct to shrink away pressed hard against her chest, but she forced herself to stand tall. Her hands moved with steady precision as she translated Elena's attack for Mark, refusing to twist or soften a single word. Mark's expression hardened. He pushed back his chair and stood, his presence commanding immediate silence. Through Mia's trembling but clear interpretation, he declared that Mia was no ordinary translator. She carried not just words, but the essence of human connection. Her gift was rare, and it was exactly what this partnership demanded. The room erupted in murmurs, but before anyone could respond, Lawrence rose. His voice was low, deliberate, and final. Mia would lead the initiative. Anyone who questioned that decision was questioning both his judgment and Mark's wisdom. His gaze locked on Elena, stripping away her confidence in a single instant. Elena faltered, her face pale as her allies looked away. The battle she had counted on was lost before it began. Mia stood in the center of the storm, her chest tight, but her hands steady. For the first time, she realized she did not need to defend herself. Others had spoken for her, and their voices carried the weight of truth. That night, after the noise of the signing ceremony had faded, Lawrence stood outside his son's bedroom door. His hands shook as he pushed it open. Noah sat on the floor with his toys, small shoulders hunched, unaware of the storm inside his father's chest. For years, Lawrence had hidden behind work, convincing himself that silence was easier than facing what he could not fix. But Mia's presence had stripped away his excuses. He knelt slowly, his heart pounding harder than any boardroom battle, and lifted his hands. The shapes were clumsy, the movements hesitant, but they carried a truth he had never spoken. "Dad loves you." Noah froze. His eyes widened, filling with tears before a soundless cry broke across his face. The little boy dropped his toy and stumbled forward, arms flinging around his father's neck. Lawrence held him tightly, his own tears spilling as years of distance shattered in a single embrace. He whispered broken words, his chest trembling, while his son clung to him as if afraid he would vanish. Mia stood at the doorway, watching with quiet reverence. Lawrence looked up, his face wet, his voice rough with emotion. He told her that she had given him the courage to face his own child, that without her he might have lost Noah forever. In that moment, the cold man everyone feared was gone. What remained was simply a father, finally brave enough to love out loud. Months passed, and the project Mia led became more than a success. It was a turning point. What began as a single initiative for inclusion grew into a model that other departments wanted to follow. The culture inside the company shifted. Ruthless competition gave way to cooperation. People began to listen more, to value each other's voices, and to see strengths where they once only saw flaws. Elena's whispers lost their power. Her schemes were exposed, and soon she was dismissed. The departure left space for something new to grow. For the first time in years, meetings were not battles for control, but conversations filled with respect. And Mia, once invisible, now stood at the center of it all, not because she sought attention, but because her presence brought out the best in others. At home, Noah's laughter filled the halls that had once been silent. He signed with growing skill, his small hands moving quickly as he shared stories with his father. Lawrence answered, slower but determined, each movement proof that he was no longer hiding. The bond between father and son grew strong, built on words they finally dared to speak with their hands and with their hearts. One afternoon, as Mia passed through the lobby, she caught Mr. Parker's kind eyes. The old guard leaned on his desk, a quiet smile warming his face. He told her softly that at last she had been seen. The words landed with the weight of truth, because what had changed was not only her life, but the lives of everyone who now believed that kindness could reshape even the coldest of places. The national launch of the Inclusion Project drew leaders, advocates, and media into the grand hall. Banners lined the walls, lights glowed bright, and yet all eyes turned to the young woman walking toward the stage. Mia's steps were steady, though her heart carried the memory of every doubt, every whisper, every tear that had brought her here. She stood at the podium and let her gaze sweep across the room. Her voice was calm but strong as she spoke. She admitted that she once believed kindness belonged in quiet corners, hidden where no one could judge. But today, she had learned something greater. Kindness needed to be seen. It needed to be lived out loud so others could believe in it too. In the front row, Lawrence sat with Noah in his arms. The boy's small hands moved with joy, shaping the word that meant everything: family. Lawrence followed, his larger hands slow but certain, echoing his son's sign. The crowd watched as father and son shared the same language at last, not only with their hands but with their hearts. Mia's chest swelled at the sight. She closed her remarks by reminding everyone that no act of compassion is ever wasted. Kindness, she said, always finds its way back. The applause rose like a wave, filling the hall with warmth that words could not contain. And so the story ended where it was always meant to lead. A family that had once lived in silence found one another. A company once known only for profit discovered its heart. And a young woman who spent her life unseen learned that courage and kindness could change everything. From a silent lobby to a home once filled with emptiness, Mia's journey was never about ambition. It was about a trembling hand choosing kindness, and how that act changed a boy, a father, and an entire company. This story reminds us that family is not just blood, but the courage to love despite fear. And love, when shared, can heal even the coldest spaces. Now I want to hear from you. If this story touched you, share your thoughts, subscribe, like, and spread it on Emotional Echoes. Thanks for listening.